Hey guys, my name is Nick and welcome back to the channel, and finally it is here, the long awaited Warhammer 40k 8th edition FAQ that was due last month, but we finally got it now. They must have been waiting for some playtest results or competitive feedback or whatever, but finally it's here, and in this video we're going to take a look at what's changed. Let's get straight into the video. So first up, as a quick reminder, let's take a look at the schedule that we're supposed to receive. So as you can see from Games Workshop, we are supposed to receive the big FAQ one in March. That's now April, and we are due another one in September. They did promise twice a year. And then also the Errata's Post Codex should be within about 2 weeks. So just as a recap, you can see the schedule there on screen. First up then is the change with Psychic Focus. Now this has been a beta rule for a few months now. I think back in November the ITC events have been trialling this. Now we already knew that you could only cast a psychic power of a particular type once per turn, like Warp Time you could only cast once per turn, and Smite was the only exception to that. Now Smite spam has been pretty hefty across 8th edition so far, and what this is now doing is every subsequent attempt to cast Smite, whether that's successful or not, you are now adding 1 to that value. So Smite starts at 5, so the second version of Smite will cost you 6 warp charge, and then 7 and so on, all the way up to a maximum of 11. Now there are a couple of exceptions, and that is the psychic heavy armies of the Thousand Suns and the Grey Knights. Now you have to be battle forged in order to gain the ability to ignore this penalty, really. So Brotherhood of Sorcerers, for example, in the Thousand Suns army, is if your army is battle forged, Psyker units gain the Brotherhood of Sorcerers. Now that normally just increased their psychic powers by a range of 6 inches, but what this in effect does is keep Smite to the casting value of 5 without any modifiers, and the same will go for Grey Knights with their Brotherhood equivalent rule. Next up is a tightening on the targeting characters ability or rule. So we all know that unless your character is in line of sight and the nearest to an enemy model, it can't be targeted. So it needs to be both nearest and in line of sight. Now what certain people were doing in certain tournaments and other abilities and other competitions and other games and all the rest of it were happening was that you were using characters to screen other characters. So there was a whole assassin army basically where you could use one type of assassin that could only be hit on 6s, make sure that he's always the nearest unit and use him as your shield to an army of characters. This prevents that from happening. So you still need to follow the first rule, but in effect your character can't screen another character. So just as a quick example then, I've got a Wraith Lord here firing at some Imperial Fist Marines. Now there's 3 tactical Marines, and then behind that is a captain with a Storm Shield, and behind him is a Jump Pack captain. Now as it stands, and as it will be with the new FAQ, that Wraith Lord still cannot shoot the 2 captains. And going on to this second example, and this is still current and still with the FAQ, that captain with the Storm Shield is technically nearer to the Wraith Lord than the other units, but he is blocked by the container there, so he has no line of sight. So that still carries forward. No change there. Still, the Wraith Lord still can't shoot any of the characters. So what happens when we remove the tactical squad and the line of sight blocking terrain? We just have the 2 captains and the Wraith Lord. Now previously, that Wraith Lord could not shoot the captain with Jump Pack, as he would have to shoot the nearest character, which in this case is the captain with the Storm Shield. Now because he's got a Storm Shield, a wily commander might not want to waste his Bright Lance against a Storm Shield because it's going to get a 3-up invulnerable, and you might want to take out the lesser character and inflict more wounds on him. You can now do that. So that first character does not count in the equation of being the nearest visible or nearest viable character target. And we've also had a clarification of targeting those characters being visible and the nearest. So in this example here, we've got those 3 tactical Marines. They're behind cover. They don't have line of sight from the Wraith Lord, but because they are the nearest, it means that the Wraith Lord still cannot target that captain with the Jump Pack, who technically is the only one he can actually see. So that has been 100% clarified as still not able to shoot or target that character. Next up is the change to tactical reserves. Now, before the FAQ came out, the the ruling was that you needed half of your army on the battlefield to start with, and you can only put half in any kind of deep strike reserve, teleportarium, or other form of arrival. And that was used to misbalance what was on the table and what wasn't, because all you had to do was do up to half of your army, and it was based on units. So if you had 10 units and 5 were real cheap chaff, you put them on the board, and then you kept your really expensive stuff to come in under complete impunity from attack, because you could place them anywhere on the board, wherever you liked, and get the biggest impact out of them, and they could be your big heavy hitting forces. This rule now clarifies that you're now measuring this not only on the number of units, but also on power level as well. So your cheap chaff units, which are only worth, 2, 3, 4, 5 power level, and your super tough units, which can be anywhere up to, over 30 power level, you're now having to balance that as well. And that was always the intention of the rule, and that's now been clarified. There's a nice addition to this as well. The addition being is that if you're going to deep strike a unit on your first turn, it must be done so wholly within your own deployment zone. Now this is to mitigate against some of the real nasty alpha strike shenanigans where, super powerful units just arrive on the battlefield all over the enemy objectives and overwhelm them with, sort of unrivaled return attacks, get charges in with potential charge re-rolls that orcs might have, for example, or other cool rules that are available. And that kind of sport the game for the defender, really, because you've got no chance of shooting back, and you could lose the game very quickly. That's the Alpha Strike remit. So if you're going to hold units in reserve and they're going to come in on the first turn, they have to do so within your deployment zone. I think that is a tremendous change. Now, there are a couple of exceptions, such as Genestealer Cults with their ambush rule. Now that is fitting for their army, but they're not deep striking with anything overly powerful. They're, you're talking Genestealer hybrids and stuff like that. So they're not game breaking, but it does prevent some of the game breaking mechanics that have been seen over the last few months. Now this change to tactical reserves is only a beta so far. This is one of 2 beta rules that are coming in. But as has been typical so far, all beta rules do tend to end up being in the full rulebook. So if you want to try these between now and September, when I expect it to become mainstream, then feel free to do so. But this is still not a compulsory option at this time. Now the second beta rule to accompany that tactical reserve one is Battle Brothers. Now from my understanding of this is to prevent the Imperial Soup type armies. Now that's where you have multiple different types of unit that all share the Imperium keyword, all within the same detachment. And that has led to some interesting shenanigans from what I've read on the internet over the last few weeks and months, that these what they're calling soup, where there is just a complete mismatch of all kinds of different things that realistically probably would fight together in their own detachment and their own organisation, but not within the same detachment. And I think that's what they're trying to prevent here. So you can still field your Imperial Guard with your Space Marine armies, but they'll be within their own detachments. You'll have your own commander and your own structure within that. It just stops a blended mismatch of units, which has probably been taken to a little bit of abuse at some of the tournaments and, some of the more competitive style gaming. So as you can see on the screen, what we're doing when we're building our Battleforge lists and we're using keywords to link each element of a detachment, you can no longer count the words Chaos, Imperium, Aldari, Ynnari, and Tyranids within that. So that means your Imperium keyworded Guardsmen and your Imperium keyworded Space Marines couldn't be in the same detachment. Field them in the different ones, can't be in the same ones. Same with Chaos, if you've got a Chaos Demons force and a Chaos Space Marine force, the Chaos word is ignored, so you need to look for things like Tzeentch or Nurgle to try and link those elements together. Now let's take a look at something that is super exciting for you command point fanatics. So the battalion and brigade detachments, which have been quite, well, certainly the brigade one has been pretty tough to fulfill, and getting 3 or 6 bonus command points has always been a bit mingy, especially with the amount of difficulty to try and squeeze that into a regular kind of 1500 or 2000 point list. We're now getting a massive buff to the command points, so you now get 5 bonus command points for a battalion detachment and 12 for the brigade detachment. So I think that's going to be tremendous for those horde-based armies like Imperial Guard and Demons, who can fulfill brigade detachments pretty cheaply, and they're now going to be rewarded with some serious command point action.
None shall pass. What? None shall pass. I have no quarrel with you, good Sir Knight, but I must cross this bridge.
Then you shall die.
Now stand aside, worthy adversary.
'Tis but a scratch.
A scratch? Your arm's off.
Now I love that scene there from the Holy Grail. What this is kind of highlighting is the change to the multiple stacking abilities that ignore wounds. So things like Disgustingly Resilient and other such abilities that you could potentially stack with other abilities. So not only would you get your armor save or your invulnerable save, you then have the potential to ignore wounds with Disgustingly Resilient and other stratagems or command benefits. And you could basically end up with 3 or 4 different rolls to prevent a wound getting through. The change to this means that you can only elect to use one of those abilities. So if you've got something that ignores a wound on a 5-up, and you have another rule that allows you to then ignore the wound on a 6-up, you're obviously going to want to choose the best one of those, which is your 5-up, but you can only choose one. Next we have a change to organised event play and how you're building your lists. Now if you've ever been to an event or an organised tournament or campaign or anything along those lines, quite often there's already inbuilt rules to limit the number of detachments that you can take. Typically up to 2,000 points there's a limit on 3 detachments. And quite often those can't be replicated either, so you can't take 3 Supreme Command detachments, for example. What's happened here is an extra column has been added to this table of the number of times that you can spam a data sheet. Now that's exactly what they're trying to prevent, right? So with all this, multiple spammed MSU, your multiple small unit type deployments, where you're spamming really cheap troops just to fill your detachments out, or alternatively spamming really cool units, really expensive units and game-breaking units, you're now being limited to the number of times that data sheet can be included. So you can't take 6 winged hive tyrants, for example, in a 2,000 point list. I can already see the Facebook trading sites and eBay looking places with lots of winged hive tyrants where people have net listed from ITC tournaments where winged hive tyrants have been quite phenomenal, already going up for sale. Now, as with every FAQ and every update to the 8th edition rulebook, there are some points balances changes that come into effect. And on screen now is that list that's been supplied by Games Workshop. So you can see that there's a number of points balances that have gone across multiple factions. For example, just looking at the craft worlds there, we can see that Farseers have gone up by 10 points, Spirit Seers by 20 points, Warlocks by 20 points, and Dark Reapers certainly have gone up as well, and they've been quite powerful with certain shenanigans and depending on your craft world. But a whole bunch of stuff in there has changed. Rabute Gilliman has gone up again, which is good to see. There's a couple other changes that I'm not going to run through on this video because that'll make it really long and I have to do an awful lot more research than I've already done. And that is the individual index and codex, a few erratas. Basically a few tweaking, how many times you can use stratagems, and a couple of other little bits and pieces, rewording mostly to make sure things are super crystal clear and super locked down. But this is going to wrap up this video. What do you think of the new FAQ changes? I know there's a few salty tears being shed across a number of forums. Grey Knight Deep Strike reduction because of the changes in the way that Deep Strike on first turn now is going to work under the beta rules. However, if you cast your memory back not that long ago, you couldn't even bring in reserves until turn 2, and even then you had to roll for it. So having that kind of level of bad feeling about this kind of change, I'm not sure where that's coming from. Is that because they don't know how to use their army, or they've learnt new tricks and tools that are probably a little bit too powerful? I don't really know. I'm not a Grey Knight player, but or any of the other factions that could benefit from it. But just go back, the last edition, you were rolling for reserves, and they couldn't be there turn 1. So I don't see this being a dramatic problem. A few points changes is always welcome because thousands more games have been played and people are, stuff is just too cheap. I'm not sure about the Warlocks, from the craft worlds, but so be it. It's a done deal. But the rest of the changes I think are pretty good. I think it's going to prevent a lot of abuse, and I do like the way that Games Workshop are all over this like a rash. that if you're going to go and copy an ITC list or some super competitive net list that's floating around, and you're going to go and spend all your money and buy it thinking you're going to, you know, break the game and beat all your mates every time, and then 2 weeks later an FAQ comes out or an errata comes out and quashes that minor loophole right out of the park. I think Games Workshop are all over this. I think it's a great thing. We're not waiting for 9th edition or another codex or whatever to fix problems. We are in the living rulebook. And when I had conversations with the community team probably last year sometime, I think at Warhammer Fest, this was the plan all along. The living rulebook. If something's being abused because thousands of players are playing thousands of games and they find these loopholes, the nature of social media is that they're going to be found out. And if you're going to try and abuse the system, you're going to get away with it for a couple of months and then it's going to be quashed. And I think that is a brilliant future to the game. This is almost like 8th edition 8.1. Rather than just waiting, you know, 2, 3, 4, 5 years for a new edition or waiting for books to reprint, this is keeping on top of it. This is keeping the problems within the game under control, and I'm a big fan of it. But let me know in the comment section below what you think of the new changes. Is it ruining your army? Are you welcoming the new changes? Or are you an open narrative play and don't give a monkeys? But if you're a matched player, which most of the community, I think on the whole, are certainly organised events and tournaments and so on are really focused on it. I really like match play personally, even if I'm just playing friendlies. Let me know what you think. Has it quashed your army? Are you going to have to revisit everything you first saw of 8th edition? Let me know in the comment section below. But if you like the video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I shall catch you guys on the next video.